Yesterday, the White House responded to the latest school shooting in Florida that left 17 dead. And here's what was and wasn't said. Take a look.
Oh shit. The View talking about gun control. You know nothing good can come out of this. Oh, and by the way, the stream this week was canceled.
And then Attorney General Jeff Sessions also vowed to confront the problem, but neither one of them ever used the words gun law reform.
Oh no, they didn't use a particular set of words that you would have liked them to have used. Seriously, that's the level of argumentation we're at.
Most Americans seem to want it, so why can't they start the conversation in D.C.?
Well, first and foremost, I'd love to see the evidence that the majority of Americans agree with such a policy, and no, a poll of the typical The View audience members wouldn't represent all Americans, since the only people who watch The View are fat suburban housewives who've abandoned their hopes and dreams long ago and now lay on the couch all day, mindlessly feeding themselves the political opinions of retards like Joy Behar or Whoopi Goldberg while subsisting on a diet of Diet Pepsi because they think it actually makes them lose weight. But even if this was the case that the majority of people supported tighter gun restrictions, this does not make the case for government restrictions on gun ownership because facts are not determined by consensus. They are determined by what is factual. Rights are also not determined by consensus. They are determined by the ethical implications of applying logic consistently. And gun ownership is a right because all property is a derivative of self-ownership. And one would be making a performative contradiction by opposing self-ownership, since you need self-ownership to express an idea. But simply, in this case, for the individual to not be able to trade freely with or create guns for themselves would be for the individual to not be able to own themselves and the results of their actions, and to do so would be to require the notion that someone else can rule over you, which would be special pleading, since you can't make different rules for different people arbitrarily while maintaining logical consistency. In other words, gun ownership is a right because I'm a human being, not because some magical piece of paper gave it to me. So if anything, the notion that the majority of people oppose guns is not a reason to force people to get rid of their guns, it is an argument against democracy and the forceful implications of it.
Money? Too much money involved, like I said yesterday, once they take money out of politics.
You know, I love how gun grabbers act like there's no rational argument against their position when in reality, every single one of their dumb arguments has been smashed to pieces. Plus, what the hell are you even talking about? There's a shit ton of Orwellian bills being proposed, such as H.R. 3999, which would outlaw any modification which makes a semi-automatic gun fire faster, or H.R. 4052, which outlaws the sale of 30-round magazines and above, which, on top of being unconstitutional, not that the government gives a shit because it can violate the Constitution at any time it likes, H.R. 4052 doesn't have a grandfather clause, which means that it's very possible that if it passes, the police could break down your front door and steal your already purchased 30-round magazines. If you want a full explanation debunking literally every gun grabber argument they've ever proposed, I'll link a video in the description I made specifically doing so.
The gun lobby is very strong. The guns, it seems to me that the gun sales are humongous. I mean, I read that the gun industry donates like contributes $54 billion a year to the American economy. That's a lot of money. So they have a lot of power to sell guns.
Power to sell guns. Jesus fucking Christ. I hate these goddamn progressive types who don't understand that simply offering you something you might want to buy is not the same as holding fucking power over you. They aren't forcing people to own guns. They aren't coercing people in any way. They are simply putting their products on store shelves and offering them to people who may want to buy them. There's a demand among the market for guns, so people end up buying them, and that turns a profit. Which, by the way, that's exactly why a fucking gun ban will never work. Guns are selling because there is a demand, and no amount of government regulation will change this. If guns are outlawed or kept out of stores, people will simply fulfill their demand by buying them elsewhere, because that's how prohibition always has and always will work. And what prohibition also naturally leads to is shoddy bootleg alternatives and giant crime networks. So cool, you get guns out of the hands of the average person. Now you've got a situation where if you defend yourself with a gun, you will be arrested. The majority of the peaceful population won't have them, since the only people who will are people who value owning a gun more than staying out of jail, which generally are only hardcore criminals. You form a large mafia or cartel presence in everyday society to try and create some protection for black market sellers, and on top of that, if you do get a gun, you have no idea if it'll misfire and kill you or blow your arms off when you try and shoot it, since many of the guns in circulation at that point would be poorly made.
And that influences politics, and that's what's wrong with the whole system, in my opinion. Take that out, you'll fix the problem.
I think you're right, you know, because when you think about it, we know that these politicians see this problem.
What problem? The problem that the facts show that countries with fewer regulations directly correlate with lower gun murders? The fact that your entire narrative is a fucking lie?
We know, and I believe deeply, that they do care about our country's children.
Oh, fuck off! That tactic is so cliche it has its own fucking Wikipedia article. Also, since the Parkland shooting, I can't help but notice the absolutely disgusting, emotionally manipulative and exploitative tactics and propaganda that gun control advocates have been using to push their agenda. Mainly, they've been going out and saying, "You don't want children to die, do you?" They did this around Sandy Hook as well, which was just 5 years ago. They had the fucking shame to be subtle about it and denied that they were using children as political pawns when people called them out on it. But it's an authoritarian agenda which seeks to strip individuals of their rights and will do anything, so I would not expect any different from such a consequentialist movement.
But I think they perhaps care more about being reelected. I think they care more about their power. And because if you are receiving a lot of money from the gun lobby, you're beholden to them. And you are. And
Well, you know what, Sonny? Some of these guys are getting like $3,000. They can't get it somewhere else.
But I think if you're receiving money, you're probably a supporter of Second Amendment rights and a supporter of the NRA. I'm not going to change anybody's opinion in this room. I'm well aware of that. I'm a big Second Amendment person. I am an NRA member.
Oh, a relatively smart person, even though she supports the NRA, and the NRA is a statist group which supports regulations on guns, despite supposedly being in favor of gun rights. Either way, you're somewhat intelligent on this topic, and your opinion sure as shit can't be any worse than the others.
I will say that when we're talking about legislation and politicians, Democrats held the Senate, the White House, and Congress in 2009 to 2010, and they did not try to renew the federal assault weapons ban. That's Democratic supermajority in 2009 to 2010. So I do think there's a little bit of speaking out of both mouths, because you have that power.
During the Bush administration?
It expired in 2004, and they didn't renew it. And I will say that after Sandy Hook, there was an attempt in 2012 to renew the ban, but it failed in the Democratic-controlled Senate. Republicans did hold the House. And I do think this is why voting is so important.
Yep, I called it. She was gonna say something stupid, even though compared to the rest of them, she sounds like a fucking rocket scientist.
Because if this is your issue, if what just happened, which is tragic and horrific, no matter what side of the aisle you are on, gets you up and moving, you should. This is why voting is so important. If this is your number one issue, go out and vote locally then against it. And for Second Amendment supporters, vote for people who support the NRA and support the Second Amendment.
Yeah, no thanks. I'd rather not submit to the authority of a mob and have to vote in self-defense to just hope that enough people guarantee with me that my rights remain uninfringed. I'd much rather have a stateless, individualist common law.
But I think most NRA members, rather, my dad's an NRA member, you're an NRA member, you used to be an NRA member, are even for common sense gun laws. My dad said there's no need for these semi-automatic weapons to be out there. It's so easy in Florida. It's easier to get an AR-15 in Florida than it is to get a handgun. You have to be 21 to get a handgun in Florida. Just 18 to get
You can't
an
even buy a
AR-15.
beer. You can't even buy a beer
but you can
in
get
Florida, but you can get an
Yes, it's
AR-15. I mean, that
irrational.
doesn't make any sense to me.
This is another common fallacious argument that gun control supporters make. The right to own a gun, or simply owning a gun, is a passive position because you're not doing anything and therefore you don't have to justify it. For example, you're sitting down watching this video right now. What if I asked you to justify why you were sitting down and watching this video? You can't justify that, nor do you need to. The burden of proof is never on the passive side. Therefore, the burden of proof is on the gun control side, since they want to take people's guns away, not the gun owners who simply own the guns.
Well, you know what
Yes.
I love?
think that
Go ahead. Sorry, baby. Go ahead.
No, the argument from NRA members and from Second Amendment supporters is much like abortion. There's not a lot of trust on both sides for compromise. And for me, I'm like, okay, we can talk about assault weapons. That being said, I know people who own them who obviously aren't mass murderers. They're hunters, and they use them for target practice and hunting. And I will say that it kind of is like, if you give a mouse a cookie, then we're going to go to, all right,
slippery slope.
it's a slippery slope going forward. And
yeah.
much like abortion, it's so emotional on both sides. I think it's hard for people on both sides to have faith that we can meet in the middle.
And
That's because there is simply no compromise on both of those issues. Either you're for murdering babies or for allowing them to live. Or, with guns, you either are for having the right to own guns or you're opposing the right to own guns.
That's the problem, because, you know, I don't know why people would use an AR-15 to hunt. I think about the argument.
With all due respect, you didn't grow up in gun country.
Yeah, but I feel like wouldn't it be more challenging with like a shotgun
but this
than
is
like
cultural
that?
as well. Gun culture is a big thing in the middle of the country, and when you're
but-
raised around them.
yeah.
But go ahead.
I'm just going to say, you know, gun culture is great. And most people who actually are part of gun culture know how to operate with guns. The problem is the people who are buying hundreds of guns to hang out with. Now, and so for me, no. I'm just saying, you know.
You mean gun collectors? What's the problem with collecting guns?
I get you want to have stuff. And to me, this is not like abortion because, you know, people make a choice with abortion. People make really hard choices with this.
And much like abortion, gun owners have the right to own their guns, much like babies have the right to live. Since there is only one justifiable position here objectively, calling this a choice is misleading and disingenuous, since democracy is just rule by mob, which is why, of all the retards on The View, Whoopi, you are my least favorite, because you're not even honest enough to spit it out. You need to disguise what you want behind euphemisms. There is no contract I signed which binds me to anything the state does, and by extension anything that people vote on. Nor do I have the option to withdraw consent from the supposed social contract you claim I'm a party to. So, in what way is this a fucking choice for anyone?
We can't even get the conversation going about, hey, is everybody seeing we have an issue here?
You aren't proposing people have a conversation, Whoopi. Otherwise, you wouldn't be pleading to legislators. You're asking them to implement laws, and you fucking know it. You know, if what you're agitating for is so bad that you can't even say it out loud without making yourself sound horrible, and you need to constantly disguise your true intentions behind these weaselly metaphors and euphemisms, don't you think what you're asking for might be bad?
Because if we're talking about the fact that this is a kid who bought it legally, who should not have been able to have access to guns, why aren't we saying, hey, let's renew this idea that people with mental health issues maybe shouldn't be the people who should have guns. There are conversations we can be having.
When will you people stop spreading this lie? It has been debunked so many times, and yet people on both sides of the debate constantly spread it. According to the American Psychiatric Association, under a single % of all shootings are perpetrated by someone with a mental illness, and only 3% of violent crimes are perpetrated by people who have a mental illness. Not only that, but people with mental illnesses are statistically 16 times more likely to be the victims of a shooting than someone who doesn't have a mental illness. So people with mental illnesses are the ones who need guns the most.
And we're not.
I want to say something about the fact that people who are pro-gun, a lot of this, the automatic weapons, they say that guns don't kill people. People kill people, okay? In Australia in 1996, there was a major mass shooting that took place. They killed 35 people, 22 were wounded. In the days that followed that, this was in 1996, the government decided all automatic weapons and semi-automatic were outlawed. They did a buyback program where people could sell their guns.
There is no correlation between Australia's gun ban and the decline of gun-related homicides, and all available statistics show that the gradual decline in crime rate is a continuing pattern which goes back several decades before the gun ban, and therefore the gun ban is irrelevant.
Since that day, there has not been one mass murder since 1996.
That is an outright fucking lie. Since Australia's gun ban, there have been multiple mass shootings. For example, the 2011 shooting in Hectorville, the Hunt shooting and Wedderburn shootings in 2014. Not only that, but Australia has 23 million people living in it and a less densely populated landmass. So if you factor in these to the figures, Australia has 14 times less people, and yet by ratio of mass shootings has twice as many as the US. You want to know why people are rejecting the gun control position? It's not because of money in politics. It's not because of those damn right-wingers. It's because not only is your position not based in fact, but it outright rejects facts to the point of denying observable reality. Alright, well, that's all for today's video. If you liked it, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.